I didn't expect the man renting out the spare room to answer the door in pressed fatigues. Not old camo pulled from a closet or something nostalgic for show. These were sharp, clean, worn the way uniforms get worn when they've been part of someone's body for decades. The fabric strained a little across his shoulders, and for a split second, I thought I had the wrong address. Then he looked at me, really looked, and whatever toughness I expected cracked. "Edward," he asked. "Yeah, I'm Gabriel," he said, already stepping aside to let me in. "Come in before the neighbors think I'm recruiting again." That was the first time he smiled. Quick, defensive, like he didn't trust it to stay. I'd found a room through a painfully plain listing online. Spare room, quiet house, no parties, prefer mature tenant. The rent was low enough to make me suspicious, but I was desperate. My last place had imploded roommate drama, unpaid bills, the usual. I needed somewhere calm, temporary, somewhere I could breathe. Gabriel's house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. Everything had a place. Shoes lined up by the door. Photos on the wall arranged with almost military precision group shots of men in uniform. Medals and frames. A younger Gabriel standing straighter than seemed humanly possible. He caught me looking. "Different life," he said. Not bitter, just factual. He showed me the room, small but clean, a narrow bed, a desk by the window. No personal touches. Like it was waiting for permission to exist. "You don't get many renters?" I asked. "No," he said. A pause. "I don't keep them long." That should have been my first warning. The first week was quiet, almost unsettlingly so. Gabriel woke up early every morning, always the same time. I'd hear his footsteps, the kettle, the radio murmuring low like a secret. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry, paid attention to rules, but never said them out loud. I told myself that was perfect, but then there were the moments that didn't fit. Like the night I came home late and found him sitting in the dark living room, TV off, hands folded, staring at nothing. When he noticed me, he straightened like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Didn't mean to worry you," he said. I wasn't worried. He nodded anyway, like he needed the reassurance. Or the way his voice softened when he asked if I'd eaten. The way he lingered near the doorway when we talked, as if leaving first felt like surrender. He was disciplined in every visible way: posture, routine, silence. But underneath it all was something brittle, something held together by habit instead of strength. One evening, I found him struggling with a jar in the kitchen. His hands shook just enough to give him away. He noticed me watching and immediately set it down. "I've got it," he said too quickly. I didn't argue. I just reached for it, twisted once, and handed it back. "Thanks," he muttered. His fingers brushed mine. The contact startled both of us. He stepped back like he'd crossed a line, jaw tightening, eyes suddenly distant. I saw it then, the fear. Not of me, of himself. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. Gabriel wasn't intimidating. He wasn't cold. He was lonely. And somehow, without meaning to, I'd rented a room in the life of the most vulnerable man I'd ever known. Living with Gabriel was like learning the rhythm of a song that never quite resolved. Every day followed the same structure. Morning routines precise enough to set a clock by. Coffee always black. Breakfast always toast, never buttered too heavily. He read the paper, even though I'm pretty sure he'd already heard the news on the radio. Some habits don't exist to be useful, they exist to keep something else from creeping in. At first, our conversation stayed surface level. Weather, rent, the neighbor's dog that barked like it was trying to start a war. But slowly, almost accidentally, the space between us softened. One night, I came home, soaked from the rain, jacket dripping onto the hardwood. Gabriel appeared with a towel before I even asked. "You'll catch something," he said. "I'm not that fragile." He hesitated, then handed me the towel anyway. Nobody thinks they are. That stuck with me. I started noticing how carefully he moved around me, like he was afraid of being too much, or not enough. He'd ask permission for things that were already his house. "Is it all right if I watch the news? Mind if I cook now?" Once, I finally said, "Gabriel, you don't have to ask." He looked at me, confused. "I do if I want things to stay peaceful." Peaceful. Not happy. Not connected. Just controlled. The cracks showed most at night. Sometimes I'd hear him pacing. Not every night, but often enough that I knew it wasn't random. Slow steps. Stop. Start again. Like he was walking off something invisible. Once I opened my door and saw him standing in the hallway, breathing hard, hands pressed to the wall. You okay? I asked softly. He flinched, actually flinched, then straightened immediately like muscle memory took over. Bad dream, he said. I didn't push. I should have, but I didn't. The first real shift happened over dinner. I'd cooked too much pasta misjudged portions the way people living alone always do. I offered him a plate. He hesitated, then sat across from me at the table like it was unfamiliar territory. You don't have to, he said. I want to. That seemed to matter. Halfway through the meal, he stopped eating, fork hovering. You don't ask, he said suddenly. Ask what? About my service. Most people do. I shrugged. If you wanted to tell me, you would. He studied me for a long moment. I could almost see the calculation happening. Risk versus habit. I was good at it, he said quietly, at being what they needed. I don't doubt that. His mouth twitched. Edo. That was the first time he admitted weakness out loud. From then on, things changed not dramatically, not all at once. Just deeper. He started lingering in doorways when we talked, sitting instead of standing, letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. One evening, after a long pause, he asked, "Why did you really move here, Edward?" I considered lying. It would have been easier. My last place didn't feel safe, I said instead. Not physically, just emotionally. He nodded slowly, like that made perfect sense. This house, he said, has rules, but it doesn't judge. I met his eyes. Neither do I. Something shifted then, subtle, like a door unlocking a fraction of an inch. Later that night, I heard a knock on my door. Not firm, not confident, just hopeful. I made tea, he said. Thought you might want some. We sat in the living room, mugs warming our hands. The TV stayed off. He told me about his late wife, not in detail, just enough to explain the absence. I told him about a relationship that ended because neither of us knew how to ask for what we needed. At some point, he laughed, really laughed. It surprised both of us. Then, just as quickly, the sound faded, replaced by something raw in his expression. I don't know how to be close to people anymore, he admitted. The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. You're doing fine, I said. You're here. He looked at me like that meant more than he was ready to accept. And in that moment, sitting across from a man who had survived more than I could imagine, I understood something clearly for the first time. Gabriel wasn't broken. He was just tired of standing at attention when all he really wanted was permission to rest. Things became easier after that night. Not lighter, but steadier, like we'd agreed on an unspoken truce with the silence. Gabriel stopped knocking before entering shared spaces. I stopped tiptoeing like a guest. We settled into something that almost looked like normal life. Shared groceries, quiet evenings, the occasional dry joke that made his eyes soften before his face caught up. But the vulnerability didn't disappear. If anything, now that I could see it, it was everywhere. He startled at sudden noises. Fireworks one evening had him rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, knuckles white around his mug. I didn't say anything, just stayed seated, breathing slow, letting him match my pace without feeling watched. Afterward, he cleared his throat. Thank you for not asking. You don't owe me explanations, I said. That earned me a look long, searching, like he was recalibrating who I was allowed to be in his life. The more comfortable we got, the more I noticed how carefully he avoided touch. Not just with me, with everything. He'd move chairs with his foot instead of his hands. Pass objects without contact. When our fingers brushed accidentally, he'd pull away like he'd been burned. So when it happened, when he touched me on purpose, it felt seismic. I was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, when he came up behind me to put a glass away. The kitchen was small. There wasn't much space to maneuver. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder as he reached past me. Just for balance, I told myself. But he didn't move it right away. It wasn't physical. Not really. Just warm. Grounded. Real. Sorry, he said, already withdrawing. It's okay, I replied, maybe too quickly. He lingered a second longer, then stepped back. But the air between us felt different, charged, unsettled. Like we'd crossed a line neither of us had drawn, but both of us had been circling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way his hand had trembled, not with fear, with restraint. A few days later, he asked if I wanted to walk with him. He didn't say where, just grabbed his jacket and waited by the door like this was a thing we did now. We walked the neighborhood in silence at first, fallen leaves underfoot, cold air biting just enough to feel alive. "You don't talk much about yourself," he said eventually. "I don't want to take up space." He stopped walking. "That's not how this works," he said, quietly but firmly. I turned to face him. His expression wasn't stern, it was concerned, like he'd recognized something familiar. "I spent years believing my only value was being useful," he continued. It nearly hollowed me out. I swallowed. "I learned early that wanting too much made people leave." He nodded slowly. "Then we're both experts in self-erasure." We stood there, the truth hanging between us like fog. Back at the house, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He hesitated before handing me one, like he was breaking a rule he couldn't quite remember. "To small rebellions," I said, raising my glass. He smiled faintly. "To staying." That was the night he told me about the panic attacks. Not in detail, just enough to name them, to stop pretending they were something else. "I hate how weak they make me feel," he admitted. "They don't make you weak," I said. "They mean you survived something overwhelming." He looked at me, then really looked, and something in his eyes softened into something dangerously close to trust. The house felt warmer after that, louder, even in silence. He started sitting closer on the couch, letting his knee brush mine without immediately pulling away. Once, during a movie neither of us was watching, his hand rested on the armrest between us, palm open, waiting. I didn't take it. Not yet, because I could feel how much it would mean. How once we crossed that line, there would be no pretending this was just a room rental. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready to admit that what was growing here wasn't convenience or companionship. It was need. Quiet, careful, undeniable need. The line eventually crossed itself, not in some dramatic, sweeping moment, but in the quietest way possible. It was late. Too late for pretending sleep came easy. I was on the couch, laptop closed, just staring at nothing, when Gabriel came out of his room. He looked unsettled, like he'd lost a battle he didn't want to talk about. "You pacing again?" I asked gently. He exhaled. I tried not to. "Come sit," I said, patting the cushion beside me before I could overthink it. He hesitated. Of course he did. Then he sat close enough that our thighs touched. He stiffened at first, then forced himself to stay. "I hate nights," he admitted. "Too much room for memories. You don't have to face them alone." The words were simple, honest, and they undid him more than anything dramatic ever could. His breathing was shallow. I could feel it through the space between us. I turned slightly toward him, not touching, just present. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything. If I let myself lean on you," he paused, voice rough. "Will you pull away?" The question landed heavy in my chest. "No," I said. "I won't." He didn't move right away. Then, slowly, like he was testing thin ice, he leaned his shoulder against mine. That was it. No keys. No confession. Just the weight of another human being choosing trust over fear. I felt him tremble once. Then again. His forehead dipped, resting against my shoulder like he was exhausted beyond words. I lifted my arm and hesitated just long enough to give him time to object. He didn't, so I wrapped it around him. He broke not loudly, not messily, but fully. Silent tears soaking into my shirt. Decades of discipline unraveling in the safety of someone who wasn't asking him to be strong. "I'm sorry," he whispered, like vulnerability itself was a crime. "Don't be," I murmured. "You're allowed." His hand gripped my sleeve. Tight, desperate, real. We stayed like that a long time. When his breathing finally slowed, he didn't pull away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, cheek pressed to my chest. "I don't know what this is," he said. "We don't have to name it." He let out a shaky breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. From that night on, touch stopped being accidental. He'd brush past me and let his hand trail briefly along my arm. Sit close enough that contact was unavoidable. Once when I came home visibly upset, He cupped the back of my neck gentle, grounding, devastating. Neither of us talked about desire, but it was there. In a way, his gaze lingered too long. In the way my body reacted when he said my name low and careful like it mattered. In the tension that coiled whenever we were alone together, pretending this was still platonic. One evening, as we stood in the kitchen, he spoke without turning around. "Edward," he said, "I haven't been touched like this in years." I swallowed. Like what? Like I'm not something fragile that might shatter if handled wrong. I stepped closer, close enough that he could feel me behind him. "You're not fragile," I said softly. "You're human." He turned then, our faces inches apart. His eyes searched mine not for permission, but for truth. "If this changes things," he said, "I don't think I could go back." "I don't want to go back," I replied. That was all it took. He kissed me not with hunger, but with reverence. Slow, careful, like every movement was a promise he intended to keep. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "I don't feel strong," he whispered. I smiled, heart full and aching. "Then let me hold you until you do." And for the first time since I'd met him, Gabriel didn't stand at attention. He leaned into me and stayed. After that night, everything slowed down in a good way. We didn't rush into anything. No dramatic declarations. No immediate rewriting of what we were to each other. Gabriel especially needed the space to move at his own pace, and I understood that instinctively. He'd spent a lifetime being told when to advance, when to stop, when to hold his ground. I wasn't about to turn closeness into another set of orders. But the intimacy was undeniable. Mornings changed first. He started waiting for me before making coffee. Sometimes he'd slide a mug across the counter without a word. Eyes soft, shoulders relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. He hummed occasionally quiet, tuneless but real. Proof that something inside him had loosened. He slept better too. Or at least, when he didn't, he stopped hiding it. One night, I woke to the sound of movement outside my door. Not pacing hesitation. I opened it to find him standing there, hair mussed, vulnerability written all over his face. "I didn't want to wake you," he said. "You didn't," I replied. "Come in." He sat on the edge of my bed like it was unfamiliar territory. Hand clasped, eyes down. "I keep thinking I should be past this," he said. "At my age." I sat beside him. Trauma doesn't check calendars. That earned me a small, grateful smile. "Can you stay?" he asked. "Not with me. Just stay." So I lay back, and he followed, careful not to crowd me. His back pressed against my chest, my arm resting loosely around his waist. Nothing more, nothing less. He exhaled deeply. "You make it quiet." I rested my chin near his shoulder. "You deserve quiet." From then on, it became a thing. Not every night, only when he needed it. And sometimes when I did. The first time he reached for my hand without hesitation, I felt it everywhere. His fingers laced with mine like they'd been practicing in secret. When he realized what he'd done, he froze. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I just forgot to be afraid." That was progress. He started talking more about his past, not the war stories people expected, but the parts that stayed with him. The guilt, the friends who didn't come back, the way he'd learned to compartmentalize pain so well that joy had gotten boxed away with it. "You don't look at me like I'm dangerous," he said once. "I don't think you are. I've been treated like I was," he admitted, like something that might go off without warning. I squeezed his hand. "You're not a weapon. You're a person." That sentence hit him harder than anything else I'd ever said. The tension between us still existed, but it shifted. Less restrained, more honest. Sometimes he'd look at me like he was trying to memorize my face. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with something like awe, as if he couldn't believe he was allowed to want this. One evening, as we sat on the couch, his thumb traced slow, absent-minded circles on my wrist. "If this ever becomes too much for you," he said quietly, "tell me." "I will," I replied. "Will you do the same?" He nodded. "I don't want to disappear again." That scared me more than anything how close he'd been to doing exactly that before I showed up. What we were building wasn't explosive or reckless. It was deliberate, gentle, rooted in mutual care rather than need alone. But beneath it all, desire was growing steady and patient. Not just physical, but emotional. the kind that makes you imagine a future without realizing you're doing it. One night, as we stood brushing our teeth side by side, he caught my eye in a mirror and smiled. Just smiled. And in that simple reflection, I saw it clearly. Gabriel wasn't just surviving anymore. He was choosing to be seen. And somehow, without planning to, I'd become the person he trusted with that choice. The first time we crossed from tenderness into something unmistakably intimate wasn't planned. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that used to pass quietly, unnoticed. We were in the kitchen again. That space had become ours somehow. Familiar. Safe. I was chopping vegetables, half listening to Gabriel talk about a man he'd served with years ago. Not a heroic story, just a memory about terrible coffee and shared cigarettes. He stopped mid-sentence. "You're bleeding," he said. I looked down. A shallow cut on my finger, barely anything. "It's fine." He was already reaching for my hand. The moment his fingers closed around mine, something changed. He didn't pull away this time. Didn't flinch. He focused, gentle, careful, like the world had narrowed to just this small act of care. He cleaned the cut, wrapped it slowly. His hands were steady. "You always do that," he murmured. "Do what?" "Say you're fine when you're hurt." I met his eyes. "I learned it from watching you." That landed between us, heavy and honest. His thumb brushed my knuckle. Once. Again. Not accidental. "Edward," he said quietly, "I am scared." "Of me?" "No," he said immediately. "Of how much this matters." I stepped closer, close enough that he could feel my breath. "We can stop anytime." He shook his head. "I don't want to." The kiss this time was different. Not tentative. Not testing. Hungry but still careful. Like he was finally letting himself feel what he'd been denying. His hands framed my face, rough palms warm against my skin. When I kissed him back, he let out a sound that felt pulled from somewhere deep in his chest. It wasn't about urgency. It was about release. We ended up in my room without saying a word. Clothes came off slowly, deliberately. Every touch felt earned. When he finally lay beside me, bare and vulnerable in a way no uniform ever allowed, he looked almost younger, almost unsure. "Talk to me," he said. "If anything feels wrong, I will, I promised." "You too." The intimacy that followed wasn't perfect. It was human. Hands shaking, breath hitching, pauses where we checked in with each other not because we had to, but because we wanted to. At one point, he stopped and rested his forehead against mine. "I've never felt this safe," he whispered. Neither had I. Afterward, he stayed close, arm draped over me like it belonged there. His breathing slowed, steady and calm. "No tensión, no vigilance." "I used to think vulnerability was weakness," he said quietly. And now I think it's the bravest thing I've ever done." He fell asleep like that, unarmed, unguarded, human. In the morning, I half expected regret. Distance. The emotional retreat I'd seen in others after crossing a line they weren't ready for. Instead, he made breakfast, burned the toast, swore under his breath, laughed when I teased him about it. Later, as we stood in the doorway before I left for work, he touched my cheek, brief, affectionate, unafraid. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said. "I don't need it mapped out," I replied. "Just honest." He nodded. I could do honest. As I walked away, I realized something profound. The old soldier who'd rented me a room wasn't disappearing into me. He was finally stepping back into himself. And somehow, we were doing it together. What surprised me most wasn't how being together changed Gabriel. It was how it changed the house. The silence stopped feeling heavy. Mornings felt softer. Even the walls seemed less rigid, like they were finally allowed to witness something other than discipline and restraint. Gabriel still kept his routine, some habits don't disappear, but they bent now, adjusted around us. He started leaving his door open. That felt big. We didn't tell anyone. Not because it was a secret born of shame, but because this thing between us felt fragile in the best way, like something still learning how to stand. We protected it by keeping it ours. But closeness has a way of stirring things you thought were settled. A few weeks in, I came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, posture too straight. The old version of him, the one that braced for impact. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked up, eyes guarded. "I had a call today. From my son." I froze. He'd mentioned him before once. Briefly. A relationship damaged by distance, by years of emotional absence. He wants to visit, Gabriel continued. Says he wants to reconnect. And how do you feel about that? His jaw tightened. Terrified. That honesty still caught me off guard sometimes. I don't know how to be his father, he said quietly. Not like this. Not after everything. I sat across from him, reached for his hands. He let me. You don't have to perform, I said. You just have to show up. He looked unconvinced. What if he sees how broken I am? I squeezed his fingers. Then he'll see the truth. And the truth is you're trying. The visit loomed like a storm cloud. Gabriel grew quieter as the date approached, sleep coming harder. One night, he admitted something he'd never said aloud. I'm afraid if I fail at this, he said, staring at the ceiling, I'll lose the right to be happy. I turned toward him, heart aching. Happiness isn't a reward you earn, Gabriel. He was quiet for a long time. The visit itself was tense but not disastrous. His son was cautious, polite, clearly unsure how to bridge years of emotional distance. Gabriel stumbled, said the wrong things, fell back into stiffness when he got overwhelmed. But he stayed. Afterward, when the door closed and the house was quiet again, Gabriel sagged like he'd run a marathon. I didn't scare him away, he said, almost surprised. No, Olivia, you didn't. That night, he cried again, but differently. Not from fear, from relief. Later, he admitted something else. I didn't think I was allowed to build a life anymore, he said. I thought my story was over. I kissed his temple. It's just changing chapters. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. We learn each other in small, unremarkable ways. His habit of reaching for my hand in crowds. My tendency to overthink when things felt too calm. We argued, once really argued, and survived it without either of us retreating. That felt like a miracle. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching dusk settle, he spoke with a certainty I'd never heard before. I don't feel invisible anymore. I leaned my head on his shoulder. Good, because I see you. All of you. He smiled, not defensive, not fleeting. Real. I'd rented a room from an old soldier expecting shelter. Instead, I found a man who taught me that strength doesn't look like standing alone. It looks like finally letting someone stand with you. And for the first time in both our lives, neither of us was bracing for the end. We were building something meant to last. I didn't realize how permanent my place in Gabriel's life had become until the day he handed me a spare key. Not ceremoniously, not with a speech. He just sat on the counter while I was tying my shoes. In case, he said. In case of what? I asked. He thought about it. In case you ever need to come home. Home. The words settled into me slowly, like it needed permission. Life didn't suddenly turn easy. Gabriel still had bad nights. I still carried my own quiet fears of staying too long, of wanting too much, of losing something I hadn't planned to find. But we stopped running from those thoughts. We said them out loud, sometimes clumsily, sometimes late at night when honesty felt unavoidable. One evening, months later, I found him in the garage, sorting through old boxes. Medals, papers, pieces of a life sealed away. I'm thinking of letting some of this go, he said. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it already did. I helped him pack things up, not to erase them, but to make room. That became our pattern. Making room. For laughter that surprised us both. For arguments that didn't end in silence. For a future neither of us had dared to imagine when we first shared that awkward handshake at the door. The day I told him my lease was technically up, he went very still. You don't have to stay, he said carefully. Not pushing. Never pushing. I want to, I replied. If you'll have me. He nodded once, throat tight. I already do. Sometimes I catch him watching me from across the room, not with disbelief anymore, but with something steadier. Gratitude, maybe, or pride. Like he's finally accepted that this life, this version of himself, is real. The old soldier is still there. Disciplined, capable, strong. But so is the man who reaches for my hand in the dark. The man who learned how to rest. The man who stopped mistaking loneliness for duty. I didn't just rent a room from Gabriel. I witnessed him lower his guard. I earned his trust. And somewhere along the way, we gave each other something neither of us had ever been trained for. a life that didn't require armor. And every night, when he falls asleep beside me unafraid, unguarded, I know something with absolute certainty. The strongest thing Gabriel ever did was let himself be loved.